Hold on to your capes, folks. It's time to break down 10 incredible comic books that have captivated me over the last 3 months. Some are tied to upcoming TV shows and movies, others are hidden keys flying under the radar, and a few are just too bizarre to miss. No matter why they made the list, they are my top 10 comics for the spring of 2024, in July. Let's kick off the list with the second issue of a now famous property that was honestly never expected to be made. Our number 10 book is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 2. When TMNT number 1 was released, creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird kept getting hit with one question over and over again. Why did you kill off the bad guy at the end? Their response was pretty simple. They didn't expect there to ever be a second TMNT issue, never mind all of the other insanity that they would experience in the ensuing decade. So with their second issue, which was released in October 1984, they were starting with a clean slate. The Shredder was dead, for now anyway, and it was time to expand the Turtles universe beyond the revenge they sought at the end of the first issue. TMNT 2 held a few introductions, most notably that of the Turtles' longtime ally April O'Neil, who Eastman had based off of a girlfriend he'd had. Every good story needs conflict, and contributing that for this issue were Baxter Stockman and his mechanical menace, the Mousers. If you grew up with the TMNT cartoon, you might remember Baxter Stockman as a human housefly mutant hybrid, but that concept wouldn't come to the Turtles comics until the first TMNT serial mini-comic was released. Like a lot of books, TMNT issues, especially the earliest Mirage issues, went to the moon during the comic bubble of 2021. Thankfully, prices have come down considerably from those highs, and they've generally stabilized at a value comparable to the prices of 2020. Looking specifically at the CGC 9.2 for TMNT number 2, values peaked at $950 in March of 2021, but the value currently rests in the neighborhood of $500 to $550. The 90-day average sales price is $536, while the 30-day is slightly stronger at $550. The Turtles are set to debut in an all-new animated series, Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that will debut on Paramount Plus on August 9th, following up 2023's successful animated film, Mutant Mayhem. Caught in the web of the number 9 spot is the book that introduced a new Spider-Man to the Ultimate Universe following the death of the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker. For the first time ever, I think anyway, let's welcome Ultimate Fallout 4 to the top 10 comics list. If you followed the channel for long, then you know I make a pretty active effort to avoid what I like to think of as the usual suspects, books that you see over and over again on Hot 10 lists across the interwebs and YouTube. However, when the time is right, you just never know what might pop up for discussion. Ultimate Fallout 4 was cover dated October 2011 and originally was distributed in a black polybag that helped contain the big reveal that was inside, because when this issue hit the stands, it was a pretty big deal. Written by Jonathan Hickman, Nick Spencer, and Brian Michael Bendis, the story was chopped up into 3 different parts, each that was handled by a different writer and artist. And speaking of the artist, the interior story was drawn by Salvador LaRocca, Clayton Crane, and Sarah Pichelli, with a cover assist from Mark Bagley. Before we dive into sales info, let's get this out there. There are a bazillion copies of this book, with most of them being very high grade. The total census count is 18,643, with 4,340 of those being 9/8 and another 4,733 being 9/6. People literally have stacks of this book, and they're just waiting for the right moment to cash in. Now, unfortunately for those hoarders, they've missed the boat, at least the first trip out, as current values have returned to their pre-boom 2020 prices. 9.8s had peaked at $4,499 back in 2022, but the current 30-day average sales price for a 9.8 is down to $1,028. If you step down to 9.6, it actually peaked in July of 2021 with a $2,400 sale. Looking at the GPA summary page for Ultimate Fallout 4, it's a virtual sea of red down arrows for this one. And in the current market, 9.6 copies are averaging a sales price around $480, but the last sale went for a song at just $360. That $360 sale is a low that hasn't been seen since 2021, when the low sale for that year was $350. If Miles Morales is a character that appealed to you, but you found yourself priced out when Ultimate Fallout 4 went to the moon during the boom, it's a pretty decent time to dip your toe into the pool if you choose to prioritize this one on your want list. Mucking about in the number 8 spot is a Bronze Age horror classic that reimagined and expanded the world of its title character. Let's check in on Swamp Thing number 1. The last time we chatted about Swamp Thing number 1 was back in the summer of 2022, and it's had quite a ride since then. Cover dated November 1972, this book came out swinging with a talented creative team that not only helped the title grab the attention of readers at the time, but co-creators Lynn Wein and Bernie Wrightson have since attained legend status in the hobby. Sadly, we lost both of them within 6 months of each other back in 2017. Pivoting from their original Swamp Thing character that debuted in House of Secrets 92, the Swamp Thing we follow in this self-titled series is the Alec Holland Swamp Thing that those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s remember from the movies and TV shows. In addition to Holland's debut, the issue also introduces primary villain Anton Arcane and also has a cameo appearance of his evil Unmen. If you're a fan of Neil Gaiman's Sandman series, Matt Cable, who you may know better as Morpheus's Raven Matthew, also premieres here in Swamp Thing number 1. When we last covered Swamp Thing number 1, it was experiencing a bit of a bump in interest and value, with multiple sales in the 600 plus range for a CGC 9.2 copy. It would peak around $700 in the summer, but by the winter of 2023, multiple sales were roughly half of that summertime high watermark. This is a price fluctuation that would repeat in grade 3 or 4 more times in the time since. June 2023 saw a record in grade with a sale of $1,000, but no sale since has come close to that level. Currently, Swamp Thing number 1 is sitting at a 90-day average sales price of $390, with a sale of $474 reporting as the high sale of the CGC 9.2 year-to-date for 2024. The value starts stepping up fairly steeply beyond 9.2, with the 90-day averages for 9.4 copies coming in at $675 and 9.6 sales averaging $1,063 over the same period. For the number 7 book, let's go all the way back to the fall of 1968, where comic book readers were greeted at the newsstand by one of the most iconic comic book covers of the late Silver Age. Not only was this cover one for the ages, but it introduced a freshly rehabilitated logo that would become one of the most recognizable logos in the history of comics, and maybe even pop culture. In the number 7 spot, I give you X-Men number 50. Cover dated November 1968, X-Men 50 is one of the hobby's favorite Steranko covers. While not as abstract as many of his Nick Fury covers, or as dynamic as his cover for King Size Hulk number 1, X-Men 50 is stunning and powerful despite its mostly olive drab color palette. Lorna Dane, a mutant whose abilities mimic those of her father, a guy you may have heard of before, Magneto, she made her second appearance here, and she would eventually adopt the name Polaris. The color of the cover is not accidental, as green would be Polaris's color of choice for many decades. The issue's primary story, which is titled City of Mutants, was written by Arnold Drake and was also drawn by cover artist Jim Steranko. And Steranko really is the story here. Yes, this cover is a classic, but despite its popularity for over 55 years now, the real story is the iconic X-Men logo we all instantly recognize today. This logo exists purely out of Steranko's pride. I was fortunate enough to personally hear him tell the story of how he refused to do another cover for the X-Men title. Remember, he'd done the art for the previous issue of X-Men, issue number 49. The truth is, he absolutely loathed what he called the amateurish logo that the series had sported since X-Men number 1's release in 1963. Now, having a background in marketing and design prior to focusing in on comics, Steranko had a really busy month, as he not only turned in the issue's cover and interior art, but also a brand new logo that is now as synonymous with the X-Men as any single story, character, or creator. To his chagrin, he received no compensation or really even credit for this new logo that has since been featured on everything from comics to animated series, toy lines, lunchboxes, and God knows what else. X-Men 50 has fared pretty well in the current market, which has seen many tough corrections for a lot of Silver and Bronze Age issues. In fact, looking at GPA's current 90-day average sales prices, many grades are outpacing the respective 12-month averages as of the recording of this video. I generally like to focus in around the $500 mark for books in this series, and for X-Men 50, that puts us at a CGC 8.5, which is currently reporting a last sale of $490, but a 90-day average sales price of $534. The CGC 9.2 grade is a bit of an outlier, as it only has a single sale reporting in the last 90 days, and that sale underperformed with a $690 result back in May. A more recent sale from earlier this month for a CGC 9.0 finished at $800, and that same grade currently has a 90-day average sales price of $761 across two sales. Values sharply jump up above 9.2, with CGC 9.4 sporting a $1,760 90-day average sales price, along with a most recent sale of $1,900. I never miss an opportunity to talk about a weird indie comic from the 80s or 90s, and this list isn't going to be any exception. For the number 6 book, let's take a look at Caliber Press's Creatures of the Id #1, featuring the first appearance of Frank Einstein, better known as Madman. Published in 1990, Creatures of the Id #1 was an indie press anthology issue which included 3 unique stories. 2 of these stories were written by Jeffrey Lang and drawn by Mike Allred, but it was the third story, titled Frank Einstein, an obvious riff off of Frankenstein, which was both written and drawn by Allred, that struck a chord with audiences. Creatures of the Id would wind up being a one-shot, with Madman's first color appearance coming later in 1990's graphic music #1, before the character landed his own 3-issue solo series from Tundra Press in 1992. Filmmaker Robert Rodriguez obtained the original movie rights for Madman back in 1998, but production could never get off the ground, but that didn't keep the character off the big screen. It's pretty clear that Kevin Smith himself, or someone else over at View Askew, are pretty big Madman fans, because the character can briefly be seen in Chasing Amy, and a Madman action figure can also be seen in a toy store scene in Dogma. It may have something to do with Allred doing the artwork for the Bluntman and Chronic comic that was featured in Chasing Amy, though. Being a fairly obscure independent one-shot doesn't seem to be the best combination of factors for a robust census account, as only 246 total copies of Creature of the Id #1 have been graded to date. So, as you might expect, comps are pretty sparse. We have 2 sales reporting in the last 90 days for graded copies. A CGC 9.2 sold for $155 earlier this month, while a CGC 9.8 sold in June for $543. eBay sold listings reflect several raw copies have sold over the last 3 months, but volume is still fairly light. Rolling into the top half of the list, let's catch up with another Bronze Age key that we last visited back in 2022 with Daredevil 131. The March 1976 issue of Daredevil introduced us to one of Daredevil's greatest villains, Bullseye. Can you imagine how much that would suck? You're 12 years into a title before one of the title character's most identifiable villains shows up. But then consider that the top villain that people currently associate with our featured hero wouldn't even come into play for another 5 years, and that's after Spider-Man spent the better part of 2 decades beating the hell out of him. That would be like Magneto not showing up in X-Men until the Dark Phoenix saga, or the Green Goblin not appearing until after Gwen Stacy had already taken a nosedive off of the George Washington Bridge. I mean, how would that even work? Anyway, Daredevil 131's creative team consisted of writer Marv Wolfman and artist Bob Brown and Klaus Janson, with artist Rich Buckler contributing the cover pencils. Since it was the 70s and Bullseye was a cool-looking character, it's no surprise that the character was designed by my guy, Jazzy John Romita. Daredevil 131 was released during the dark days of the Marvel value stamps, meaning that there's no shortage of mangled copies out there. While the most famous Marvel value stamp is the Sheena stamp that is notoriously missing from Hulk 181, Daredevil 131 held Marvel value stamp number 47 that featured the mighty Thor. Focusing in on CGC 9.4 copies, the record price and grade was set in August 2021 with a wild $1,350 sale. This was just the second time the book had ever sold for more than $1,000 in a 9.4 grade, but 2022 would bring 4 more 4-figure sales, with the highest of those coming just short of the all-time record at $1,330 in March 2022. The most recent 4-figure sale was back in August of 2022. In fact, no 9.4 copy of Daredevil 131 has sold for more than $800 since the fall of 2022. The most recent sale in grade came earlier this month at $456, while the current 90-day average sales price is a respectable $577. One of the best perks of being a superhero is having a secret, or sometimes not so secret, headquarters. Batman has the Batcave, the Avengers have Avengers Tower, while across town you can find the Fantastic Four at the Baxter Building. For our number 4 book, we're going to dive into the first appearance of the loneliest superhero HQ there is, a place that even a guy named the Lone Ranger would find companionless. Sorry, Tonto. We're talking about the only place for a Superman to call home, the Fortress of Solitude, which debuted in Action Comics number 241. Cover dated June 1958, Action 241 hails from a period of time where DC books are notoriously tough to find in high grade. But there's no shortage of noteworthy issues that come from this time, which is kind of a bummer. In fact, the next issue of Action Comics would introduce one of Superman's best villains when Brainiac shows up for the very first time. Now, way back in 1949's Superman number 58, a prototype of the fortress was shown, and while it wasn't called the Fortress of Solitude on the cover, the name slipped inside the story, but it looked nothing like the Fortress of Solitude we all know today. Unfortunately for the Man of Steel, he may need to upgrade the security of his fortress, because this very first time we see it, Batman has already broken into the Fortress of Solitude to play a prank on Supes for his birthday. Written by Jerry Coleman with interior art from Wayne Boring, the cover art was provided by none other than legendary Superman artist Curt Swan. Graded sales for this issue are pretty tough, as the total census sits at just 86 graded copies, with a total of 5 graded sales in the last 12 months. We don't have a ton of data to go off of, but oddly enough, 2 of those 5 sales took place in just the last month. A CGC 3.5 copy sold for $229, which is more than a 20% drop from the previous sale that took place back in 2023. The other sale was for a CGC 6.0 copy that sold for $480. Prior to that sale, a CGC 6.0 copy had not sold since 2014. 4 raw sales are reporting on eBay dating back to May 1st. Most of those sales have been for good to very good copies and have sold for around $150, though the most recent sale, which was described as a good plus copy, went for just $59. Personally, I think the seller undersold it, as it presents a lot better than that, but congrats to the buyer for getting a great deal. The key with this issue, some pun intended, is that mid to higher grade copies are going to be really tough to come by, and the price is going to go up very quickly, if you're even able to track one down. Next up, in third place, is a book that is affectionately known as the Third Claw variant, Wolverine Origins 10, the 1 in 100 variant. Cover dated March 2007, Wolverine Origins 10 would have been enough of a key all on its own, with the son of Wolverine, Daken, making his first appearance. What makes the 1 in 100 variant special is that it's a bit of a spoiler variant. The A cover depicts Daken's 2 top claws coming out of his hand, similar to X-23's dual claws. What we all know now, 17 years later, is that Daken actually has 3 claws, 2 on top and 1 on the underside of his wrist. That's exactly what this third claw variant shows off. I had been back in the hobby for a couple of years when this thing came out, and I distinctly remember how crazy the market went for this thing at the time. By some miracle, my LCS wound up with a copy, and of course I wound up bringing it home. It had to have been a massive happy mistake, because I couldn't tell you the last book they bought 100 copies of, on purpose anyway. The standard A cover and the 1 in 100 Third Claw variant were both drawn by Joe Quesada, who was Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time. The interior creative credits go to writer Daniel Way and artist Steve Dillon of Hellblazer and Preacher fame. The census is fairly strong for this one, with a total count of 1,114 graded copies. 9.6s are the most common grade, with 283 copies, while just 123 have been graded at 9.8. Sales of 9.8 copies are on a bit of a drought, with only 3 sales reporting in the last 12 months, with a last sale value of $850. There's been a fair number of sales in both the 9.4 and 9.6 grades, with 7 and 6 sales reporting respectively within the last 90 days. The 9.4s have a 90-day average sales price of $422, but have a strong last sale right at $500, while the 9.6 is on a similar track with a 90-day average sales price of $714, with a very strong last sale at $900. That $900 sale is tied as the second highest sale in grade, behind a single sale in January 2022 for $1,400. I hope that buyer has a really long-term hold plan, because it's likely going to be a bit before I think we're going to see numbers like that again. Regardless, this is one of the few modern area ratio variants that I actually put much stock in. Creeping its way to the runner-up spot is a book that not only introduces a fantastic member of Batman's Rogues Gallery, but an issue that may have a compelling claim for being the book that kicked off the Bronze Age of comics. The number 2 book is Detective Comics number 400, the first appearance of Man-Bat. While researching for this video, I came across an interesting article from June 12, 2019 from Bleeding Cool's Mark Seifert titled Man-Bat, Detective Comics 400 and What Really Ended the Silver Age. In short, Seifert posited that Tech 400, which hit stands just a few months after Green Lantern 76, which is what is often considered to be the breaking point between the Silver Age and the Bronze Ages, actually makes more sense as a point of delineation than Green Lantern 76. His reasoning, which makes a lot of sense to me, is that when you think of the Bronze Age of comics, what comes to mind? Monsters, vampires, anti-heroes, and the general return of a horror element into comics. Well, Detective 400 hands down started that party, way more than a year before the Comics Code got its first rewrite in 1971, which started allowing more of those things. Cover dated June 1970, Detective Comics 400 was a Neal Adams showcase, especially if you believe Adams' take on the origins of the Man-Bat character. Adams drew both the cover and interior art, and, as he would tell the story, provided the premise of Man-Bat to Frank Robbins, who receives the writing credit for the issue's main story. Julie Schwartz had a different recounting of the story, but God only knows where the truth actually lies, as legendary creators often have legendary egos in tow. While Man-Bat was a perfect new addition to Batman's Bronze Age tales, the character really shined when Batman the Animated Series hit Fox's afternoon schedule. In fact, the character was the focus of the show's second episode, making Man-Bat the second baddie to challenge the animated Dark Knight only after Catwoman. Shifting gears to check out some recent sales, let's first check in on CGC 7.5s, which are up a little over 10% in the last 90 days compared to their 12-month average. The last sale from June 2024 came in at $500, a solid $50 above the 90-day average sales price of $450. Jumping up to the 9.0 grade, this is the last stop for budgets under 4 figures. The 12-month average price for a 9.0 is sitting at $1,039, but that figure is facing some significant downward pressure from the 90-day average sales price of $881, and to a greater extent, the most recent sale from earlier this month of just $761. The census count for Tech 400 is fairly small for a Bronze Age key, with just 1,630 total copies reporting. Of those 1,630 copies, just 163 are graded higher than 9.0, with only 10 9.8s as of the recording of this video. The gray-blue background and blacks along the spine make this thing an easy target for color-breaking spine ticks. Flying high over all of the rest, our number 1 book is Captain America number 100. The most elusive of the big premiere issues of April and May 1968, in my experience anyway, Captain America 100 picks up right where Tales of Suspense 99 left off, literally. Cap booted that bum Iron Man out of the book they'd shared since 1964, and not only did he keep the Ice Cube trace, but he kept the numbering for his brand new self-titled series. Breakups can be pretty brutal. Cover dated April 1968, Captain America 100 returned the Sentinel of Liberty to his own title for the first time since September 1954's Captain America number 78. Cap 100 retained the creative supergroup of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, as had begun all the way back in Captain America Comics number 5 when they first paired up for a 2-page story, and then later resumed in Tales of Suspense 59 when Captain America began sharing the title with Iron Man. As with most of the good relaunch issues out there, Captain America 100 starts off with a retelling of Cap's origin before rolling right back into the action of TOS 99. This might as well have been an Avengers story though, as half of the Marvel Universe is in this one. Black Panther, Submariner, Iron Man, Giant Man, Wasp, Thor, Agent 13, Nick Fury, and that's without mentioning any of the bad guys like Baron Zemo, which also show up. Cap 100 has a sizable census count with 6,388 copies currently on the census, including 2 9.9 copies, and we all know how in 9.9s are right now. Let's take a look at the more modestly priced CGC 8.0, as I'm guessing most of us don't have the spare 78K sitting around, which is what the most recent sale for one of those 9.9s went for back in January 2024. Down at the 8.0, we find a much more accommodating 90-day average sales price of $552. Though, in some unusual coincidence, the last sale of an 8.0 went for just $433, while the 7.5, which has a 90-day average of $469, fairly comparable, right, has a last sale of $550. Both of those recent sales are from this month. That's kind of weird. It's a steep climb price-wise from 8.0 to 8.5, and once you break into the 9s, the price tags pick up an extra digit. But that's not holding back CGC 9.2 copies, which have had a healthy 7 sales in the most recent 90 days, for an average price of $1,653. I was finally able to check this one off of my list at C2E2 this year, and within a month I'd already upgraded. It's kind of funny how things work out in this hobby sometimes. And that's a wrap for the spring. It's time to start working on the summer budget series, but first up, before we dive into that, will be the back in the day top 10 countdown for August. Keep an eye out for that one. After a brief reprieve from what seemed like a busy spring with shows in Kansas City, St. Louis, and even putting on the most recent Como show, I'm excited to be getting back out on the road with a stop in St. Louis this weekend on Sunday, July 28th for the July Shrewsbury show, and then in a couple of weeks I'll be heading to the KC metro area for my first GarageCon experience on August 10th. If you're interested in either of those shows, I posted the flyers for each of them in a community post a few days. Just head over to the channel homepage and click on community, and you should have no problem finding that post. That's all I've got for this one. Collect responsibly, and I'll see you in the next video.